The champagne bubbles caught the crystal chandelier's light as Victoria
Sterling.
adjusted her emerald necklace one final time. Tonight's charity gala at the Grand Ballroom would raise millions for children's hospitals across America. She had spent months planning every detail, from the auction items to the 7-course dinner menu. Everything had to be perfect at 28. Victoria had learned that perfection was not just expected from someone with the Sterling name, it was demanded. Her father William had built Sterling Industries from a single steel mill into a global empire worth $12 billion. The family name carried weight in every boardroom from New York to Tokyo. "You look beautiful, darling," Jonathan Blake said, appearing behind her in their penthouse mirror. At 32, her husband of 3 years still made her heart skip with his confident smile and piercing blue eyes. His tech company, Blake Innovations, had revolutionized data security for major corporations. Together, they were considered one of America's most powerful young couples. Victoria turned to face him, smoothing his black tie. "Are you ready for your speech tonight? The investors are very excited about the new partnership announcement." Jonathan's smile flickered for just a moment. "About that? I might need to make some last-minute changes to the presentation. Natalie has been working on some updated projections." Natalie Cross had joined Blake Innovations 6 months ago as Jonathan's personal secretary. Victoria had met her only briefly, a polite woman with auburn hair and sharp green eyes who seemed dedicated to her work. Perhaps too dedicated, Victoria sometimes thought, noting how often Jonathan mentioned her suggestions during dinner conversations. "Of course," Victoria replied, though something in Jonathan's tone felt different tonight. "I'm sure whatever changes you make will be perfect." The Grand Ballroom buzzed with 500 of America's wealthiest philanthropists. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced grace, discussing donation-matching programs with tech moguls and hospital expansion plans with oil executives. This was her element, using the Sterling influence to create real change in the world. "Victoria, dear, what a lovely event," came a familiar voice that made Victoria's shoulders tense. Caroline Blake, her mother-in-law, approached wearing a silver gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. At 58, Carolyn had maintained her beauty through expensive treatments and designer everything. But her smile never quite reached her cold gray eyes. "Caroline? I'm so glad you could make it," Victoria replied politely. The relationship between them had always been strained. Caroline seemed to view Victoria as competition for Jonathan's attention rather than his chosen partner. "Well, I couldn't miss seeing my son's big announcement, though I do hope he's prepared. You know how these tech presentations can be so unpredictable." Caroline's laugh had a sharp edge to it. Men like Jonathan need proper support, not just pretty faces at charity events. Before Victoria could respond, the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. Victoria took her seat at the head table, watching as Jonathan prepared to present their joint venture with Sterling Industries. The partnership would bring her family's manufacturing expertise together with his innovative security technology. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, "please welcome Jonathan Blake, CEO of Blake Innovations." Jonathan walked to the podium with confidence, his presentation remote in hand. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Blake Innovations logo. Victoria felt a flutter of pride as the audience applauded. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Jonathan began. "What I'm about to share will revolutionize how we think about corporate security and manufacturing integration." He clicked his remote to advance to the first slide. Instead of corporate charts and financial projections, the screen filled with an intimate photograph. Victoria's blood turned to ice. The image showed Jonathan and Natalie in what was unmistakably their bedroom. Her wearing Victoria's favorite silk robe, the ballroom gasped collectively. Jonathan spun around, his face draining of color as he saw what had appeared on the screen. He frantically clicked the remote, but each click brought up another compromising photo. Jonathan and Natalie at romantic restaurants. Natalie wearing Victoria's jewelry. Text message, screenshots, planning secret weekend getaways, turn it off, someone shouted from the audience. The technical crew scrambled, but the presentation system had frozen. For 30 excruciating seconds, 500 guests and the live streaming audience watched Jonathan Blake's affair play out in high-definition detail. The final image was the most devastating. A screenshot of text messages between Jonathan and Natalie. "Can't wait until the divorce is final. The sterling money will set us up for life. Victoria never has to know about our real plans for the company merger." Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her hands gripping her champagne flute so tightly she thought it might shatter. Around her, the ballroom buzzed with shocked whispers and the clicking of phone cameras. Her perfect charity gala had become a public humiliation, broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Jonathan finally managed to shut down the presentation, leaving the ballroom in stunned silence. He looked directly at Victoria, his face a mask of panic and guilt. "Victoria, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." But Victoria was no longer listening to her husband. She was watching Caroline Blake's reaction. While everyone else showed shock or sympathy, Caroline wore an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. Her mother-in-law was actually pleased by Victoria's humiliation. "I need some air," Victoria announced quietly. Rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could manage, she walked through the silent crowd, feeling 500 pairs of eyes following her every step, in the ladies' lounge. Victoria finally allowed herself to process what had just happened. Her marriage was over. Her husband had been planning to steal from her family. Her mother-in-law had known all along. The charity gala she had worked so hard to perfect had become a nightmare she could never escape. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Come home immediately. We need to talk." Victoria knew that tone. William Sterling was not just her father in that moment. He was the man who had built an empire by never letting anyone take advantage of him. And someone had just tried to take advantage of his daughter, back in the ballroom. Jonathan attempted to salvage the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a serious security breach tonight. Someone has hacked our presentation system and deliberately sabotaged this event, but the damage was done." Guests were already leaving, phones buzzing with calls to gossip columnists and social media posts. The Sterling-Blake partnership announcement was forgotten. Overshadowed by the spectacular revelation of Jonathan's affair, Natalie Cross was nowhere to be seen. She had slipped out during the chaos, leaving Jonathan to face the consequences alone. Later investigation would reveal that she had uploaded the photos herself. Though her motivation remained unclear, Caroline Blake approached her son as the ballroom emptied. "Well, that could have gone better," she said with a slight smile. "Though I suppose Victoria learned some valuable lessons tonight. Mother, this is a disaster. My reputation, the company, everything is ruined, perhaps. Or perhaps this is exactly what needed to happen. The Sterling family has always looked down on us, thinking their old money made them superior. Tonight, everyone saw that their precious daughter couldn't even keep her husband satisfied." Jonathan stared at his mother in horror. "You knew about Natalie?" Caroline's smile widened. "Darling, I've known about Natalie for months. I was the one who suggested you hire her in the first place. She came very highly recommended by some business associates of mine." "What business associates?" But Caroline was already walking away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Clean up this mess, Jonathan. And remember, the Sterling fortune won't be protecting you much longer." As Victoria drove through the city toward her father's estate, she couldn't shake the image of Caroline's satisfied smile. Her mother-in-law hadn't just known about the affair. She had orchestrated tonight's humiliation. But why? And who exactly was Natalie Cross? The questions multiplied as Victoria pulled into the circular driveway of Sterling Manor. Her father waited on the front steps, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Behind him stood a man Victoria didn't recognize, someone who carried himself with the careful alertness of law enforcement. "Victoria," her father said as she approached, "we have a lot to discuss. It seems Jonathan and his family have been playing a much more dangerous game than any of us realized." The man beside her father stepped forward. "Miss Sterling, I'm Agent Robert Chin with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We've been investigating Blake Innovations for several months now. Tonight's incident may have exposed something much larger than a simple affair." Victoria looked between the two men, her mind racing. "What are you talking about?" "Your husband's company has been selling sensitive manufacturing data to foreign competitors," Agent Chen explained. "We believe tonight's presentation malfunction wasn't an accident. Someone wanted to create chaos to cover their tracks. And Caroline Blake, her father added grimly, has been funneling money through fake charity organizations for years. The woman who just humiliated you at that gala is involved in one of the largest money laundering operations we've ever investigated. Victoria sank onto the marble steps, her evening gown pooling around her. Her marriage was over, her public humiliation was complete. And now she was learning that her husband and mother-in-law were criminals. But as the shock began to wear off, something else emerged. Anger. They used me, she said quietly. The marriage, the charity work, the business partnership. All of it was just a way to get access to Sterling Industries. Yes, her father confirmed. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated who they were dealing with. The Sterling family has survived and thrived for 5 generations because we protect our own. Agent Chen nodded. With your cooperation, Miss Sterling, we can bring down this entire network. Your husband, his mother, and everyone involved in their schemes. Victoria stood up, smoothing her gown. The tears had dried, replaced by cold determination. What do you need me to do? First, her father said, you need to understand that Caroline Blake's reaction tonight was premature. She celebrated too early, thinking she had destroyed you. She has no idea that we've been watching them for months. And Natalie Cross? Victoria asked. Agent Chen and her father exchanged a look. That's where this gets interesting, the agent said. Natalie Cross doesn't exist. The woman your husband was having an affair with is actually a corporate spy named Nina Volkov. She's wanted in connection with data theft operations across 3 continents. Victoria felt the world shift beneath her feet once again. Her husband hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been seduced by a professional criminal who had played him perfectly. And Caroline Blake, the woman who had mocked her at the gala, was about to learn that the Sterling family's reach extended far beyond steel manufacturing. They wanted to humiliate me publicly, Victoria said slowly. They wanted everyone to see the Sterling daughter as weak and foolish. Yes, her father replied, but they forgot something important. Humiliation only works if you let it define you. And Sterling women don't break. We rebuild. As they walked into the manor, Victoria's phone buzzed with notifications. Social media was exploding with reaction to the gala disaster. #Sterling scandal was trending worldwide. Photos from the presentation were being shared millions of times, but Victoria no longer cared about the public embarrassment. Caroline Blake had made a fatal error in judgment. She had assumed that destroying Victoria's marriage would destroy Victoria herself. Instead, it had freed Victoria from any obligation to protect the people who had betrayed her. The woman who had laughed at her humiliation tonight had no idea what was coming. Caroline Blake was about to learn why the Sterling family had remained powerful for over a century. They didn't just build empires. When necessary, they destroyed their enemies completely. Victoria looked at her reflection in the manor's grand mirror. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled from the evening's chaos. But her eyes held a new fire. The naive wife who had walked into that ballroom no longer existed. In her place stood someone much more dangerous. A Sterling who had been underestimated, betrayed, and humiliated. Caroline Blake had wanted to see her break. Instead, she was about to witness Victoria's transformation into something far more formidable than the pampered heiress everyone assumed her to be. The morning after the charity gala disaster, Victoria Sterling sat in her father's study surrounded by classified FBI documents. Agent Chen had arrived at dawn with boxes of evidence that painted a picture far more sinister than a simple corporate affair. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times as Victoria turned another page. Her coffee growing cold beside her. Nina Volkov has been operating under at least 12 different identities across in North America and Europe, Agent Chen explained, pointing to a surveillance photograph. The woman your husband knew as Natalie Cross is actually one of the most sophisticated industrial spies we've ever tracked. Victoria studied the image. Without the auburn wig and colored contacts, Nina looked completely different. Her real hair was blonde, her eyes brown, and there was something cold and calculating in her expression that the sweet secretary persona had, completely hidden. "How long has she been targeting Jonathan?" Victoria asked. "We believe she identified him 18 months ago," her father William replied grimly. Blake Innovations had just won the government contract for military communications security. Someone wanted that technology, and they sent Nina to get it. Agent Chen pulled out another file. "But Nina's employment with your husband wasn't random chance? Someone with insider knowledge of your family's business dealings recommended her for the position. Someone who knew exactly how valuable a Sterling Industries partnership would be." Victoria's stomach dropped as understanding dawned. "Carolyn, we've been investigating Mrs. Blake's charity organizations for 2 years," Agent Chen confirmed. "Hope for Tomorrow Foundation, Children's Dreams International, Global Education Initiative. All fake charities she's been using to launder money from foreign sources." William Sterling's jaw tightened as he opened another folder. "The money trail leads back to industrial espionage operations, targeting American manufacturing companies. Caroline has been the American contact for a network that steals technology and sells it to overseas competitors. So Jonathan's affair wasn't just personal betrayal," Victoria said slowly. "It was part of a larger operation to steal from both our companies." "Exactly. And last night's presentation disaster wasn't Nina accidentally sending photos. She deliberately uploaded them to create chaos and distraction while she completed her real mission." Agent Chen showed Victoria a computer analysis. During the 30 seconds, everyone was staring at those photos. Someone accessed Blake Innovations' secure servers and downloaded terabytes of classified data. Victoria felt anger building in her chest like a physical force. The affair had been devastating enough, but learning that her humiliation had been calculated, that her pain had been choreographed as a diversion for theft, made her furious in a way she had never experienced. "Where is Nina now?" she asked. "Gone. She disappeared from her apartment sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. Professional job. No traces left behind. But she made one mistake." Agent Chen smiled grimly. "She didn't know we'd been monitoring Blake Innovations servers for months. Every file she downloaded, every piece of data she stole, it all contained tracking software." William Sterling stood and walked to the study's large window overlooking the estate grounds. "Caroline Blake played a very dangerous game. She thought she could use our family name to legitimize her criminal activities, steal our technology, and destroy our reputation all at once." "What's our next move?" Victoria asked. Agent Chen looked between father and daughter. "That depends. Are you willing to help us catch them?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "Caroline doesn't know we're onto her yet. She thinks last night was a complete victory. Your husband is cooperating with our investigation in hopes of a reduced sentence. But Caroline believes she's still in control." Agent Chen pulled out a recording device. "We want you to confront her. Get her talking about the charity operations, about Nina, about anything that could help us build our case. It's dangerous," William warned his daughter. "If Caroline realizes what you're doing, if she suspects we know about the criminal network, she might try to eliminate threats to her operation." Victoria thought about Caroline's satisfied smile at the gala, the way she had enjoyed Victoria's humiliation. The woman had celebrated watching her son's wife suffer public betrayal. She had orchestrated the destruction of Victoria's marriage for money, and had felt pleasure in the process. "She wanted to see me broken," Victoria said quietly. "She wanted me to be the weak society wife who crumbled under scandal. Let her think she succeeded." 2 hours later, Victoria sat in the elegant living room of Caroline Blake's Beacon Hill townhouse. Her mother-in-law had agreed to the meeting immediately when Victoria called, probably eager to gloat about the previous evening's events. "Victoria, dear, you look terrible," Carolyn said with false sympathy as she poured tea from an expensive china set, though I suppose that's understandable after last night's unfortunate incident. Victoria had dressed carefully for this meeting, choosing clothes that made her appear fragile and defeated. Her hair was pulled back severely. She wore no makeup, and she had practiced the art of looking broken while maintaining complete mental focus. "I don't know what to do." Caroline, Victoria said, letting her voice shake slightly, the scandal is everywhere. The board of directors is asking questions about the Sterling Industries partnership with Blake Innovations. Caroline's eyes lit up with satisfaction. Well, perhaps this is a blessing in disguise. You're still young, you can rebuild your life. Though I imagine the financial settlement will be complicated. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Victoria said carefully. Jonathan's lawyer mentioned that Blake Innovations might not be as valuable as we thought. Something about irregularities in the company's contracts and financial records. For just a moment, Caroline's mask slipped. Victoria caught a flash of panic in her mother-in-law's eyes before the older woman regained her composure. I'm sure that's just lawyer talk, Caroline said dismissively. Jonathan has built a very successful company. Though, of course, success in the technology sector can be so unpredictable. Victoria leaned forward, playing the role of desperate ex-wife. Caroline, I need to ask you something directly. Did you know about Natalie? Know about her? What do you mean? You recommended her for the job, didn't you? Jonathan mentioned months ago that you had suggested he hire someone to help with administrative tasks. Someone you knew through your charity work. Caroline set down her teacup with steady hands. But Victoria noticed the slight tremor in her voice. I may have mentioned that I knew of someone looking for employment. The charity work puts me in contact with many people seeking opportunities. Which charity was that? Victoria pressed gently. I've been thinking about increasing my own charitable giving, maybe focusing on the organizations that meant something to Jonathan's family. Oh, various organizations. Hope for Tomorrow does wonderful work with disadvantaged youth. We've helped place many people in good positions. Victoria nodded sympathetically. That sounds lovely. I'd love to visit their offices sometime, maybe make a substantial donation. Where are they located? Again, that flash of panic in Caroline's eyes. They're very small, mostly work-from-home offices. Not really set up for visitors. But I could certainly pass along your interest in supporting their mission. The conversation continued for another hour, with Victoria carefully probing for information while maintaining the facade of a broken woman seeking comfort from her mother-in-law. Caroline, drunk on her perceived victory, revealed more than she intended. She mentioned other charities that existed only on paper. She talked about helping international business people establish connections in America. She even hinted at the lucrative nature of facilitating technology transfers between companies. The modern world requires so much cooperation between nations, Caroline said at one point. Information sharing, technology partnerships. Those who can facilitate such arrangements find it very profitable. When Victoria finally left Caroline's townhouse, she had enough recorded conversation to help the FBI build a comprehensive case against the charity fraud operation. But more importantly, she had confirmed what she suspected about her mother-in-law's character. Caroline Blake wasn't just a criminal. She was someone who took pleasure in others' pain. She'd enjoyed every moment of Victoria's humiliation because she genuinely believed that destroying other people elevated her own status. That evening, Victoria met with Agent Chen and her father to review the day's intelligence gathering. The recording device had captured everything, including Caroline's admissions about the fake charities and her hints about international technology transfers. This is exactly what we needed, Agent Chen said with satisfaction. Combined with Jonathan's cooperation and our surveillance of the financial networks, we can move forward with arrests. When? Victoria asked. Soon, we're coordinating with international law enforcement to catch Nina Volkov before she can disappear completely. Once we have her in custody, we'll move on Caroline and the rest of the network. William Sterling looked at his daughter with pride. You did well today, Victoria? Caroline never suspected you were gathering evidence. Victoria nodded, but her expression remained serious. She enjoyed it, you know? Talking about my humiliation, about Jonathan's affair. She genuinely takes pleasure in other people's pain. Some people do, her father replied quietly. That's why justice matters. That's why we don't let them get away with hurting innocent people. Agent Chen gathered his files. There's one more thing, Victoria. We've discovered that Caroline's network targeted your family specifically because of Sterling Industries' defense contracts. This wasn't random corporate espionage. They wanted access to military-grade manufacturing processes. The weight of that revelation settled over Victoria like a cold blanket. Her marriage hadn't just been destroyed for money. It had been sacrificed for technology that could potentially be used against American interests. How many other families has she done this to? Victoria asked. We're still investigating. But we believe there are at least 6 other cases where Caroline's network infiltrated American companies through personal relationships. Marriages, business partnerships, friendships. They find emotional vulnerabilities and exploit them. Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Nina Volkov was probably planning her next identity, her next target, her next victim. Carolyn Blake was likely celebrating what she thought was a perfect victory, never suspecting that federal agents were preparing arrest warrants. I want to be there when you arrest her, Victoria said firmly. Agent Chen looked surprised. That's not usually how we handle these operations. Caroline Blake destroyed my marriage to steal from my family and my country, Victoria replied. She took pleasure in my pain because she thought I was weak. I want her to see that she was wrong. William Sterling smiled at his daughter's determination. The Sterling family has always believed in facing our enemies directly. If Victoria wants to witness Caroline's arrest, I think that's appropriate. Agent Chen nodded slowly. I'll see what I can arrange. As Victoria drove home that night, she reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she had been planning a charity gala and worrying about her husband's presentation. Tonight, she was part of an FBI investigation that would dismantle an international espionage network. The naive wife who had trusted her husband and tried to build bridges with his difficult mother was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and far more dangerous to those who would try to harm her family. Carolyn Blake had wanted to see Victoria Sterling broken and defeated. Instead, she had awakened something in Victoria that had been dormant her entire privileged life. The killer instinct that had built the Sterling Empire. The ruthless determination that had maintained their power across generations. Tomorrow, the woman who had laughed at Victoria's pain would learn exactly what kind of enemy she had made. And Victoria intended to be there to watch Caroline's world collapse, just as completely as her own. Marriage had been destroyed. The game Caroline had started, with such confidence, was about to end very differently than she had planned. 3 days after Victoria's undercover meeting with Caroline, federal agents moved with military precision across 3 continents. At exactly 6 in the morning, coordinated raids began in 12 cities, from Boston to Berlin. The network that had taken years to build was dismantled in a single morning. Victoria stood in the FBI command center watching multiple screens display simultaneous arrests. In Prague, Nina Volkov was taken into custody as she tried to board a flight to Moscow using her 4th fake passport. In Miami, financial investigators seized Caroline's offshore accounts containing over $40 million in laundered money. Target acquired, came Agent Chen's voice through the radio. Victoria watched on the monitor as FBI agents approached Caroline Blake's Beacon Hill townhouse. Her former mother-in-law answered the door in an expensive silk robe, probably expecting her morning coffee delivery. Carolyn Blake, you're under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to commit espionage, and fraud, Agent Chen announced as handcuffs clicked around Caroline's wrists. The woman who had laughed at Victoria's humiliation 3 days earlier now stood in her doorway in shock, her perfectly styled hair disheveled and her composure completely shattered. This is a mistake, Caroline protested as agents led her to their vehicle. I want my lawyer. You can't prove anything. Agent Chen held up a tablet displaying bank records. Mrs. Blake, we have documentation of over 200 fraudulent transactions through your fake charities. We have recordings of you discussing technology transfers with foreign agents. And we have testimony from multiple witnesses, including your daughter-in-law. Caroline's head snapped toward the command center building. Victoria realized her former mother-in-law could see her through the window. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Caroline's expression shifted from shock to rage to something that looked almost like respect. Victoria raised her hand in a small wave, the same gesture Caroline had used when leaving the charity gala after Victoria's humiliation. The message was clear. The weak society wife Caroline had mocked was gone, replaced by someone who fought back. Jonathan's arrest had taken place. An hour earlier at the federal courthouse, where he was meeting with prosecutors. Despite his cooperation with the investigation, he still faced serious charges for his role in the technology theft. Victoria felt no satisfaction watching her estranged husband led away in handcuffs. The marriage had been built on lies, but she had loved the man she thought he was. "How do you feel?" "Agent," Chen asked Victoria as they watched Caroline's transport vehicle disappear into Boston traffic. Victoria considered the question carefully. "Empty, mostly. 3 days ago, I thought I was married to an ambitious but honest man with a difficult mother. Now I know my husband was a criminal and his mother was running an international espionage network. It's hard to process." William Sterling joined them at the observation window. "The important thing is that justice is being served. Carolyn Blake and her associates won't be able to hurt other families the way they hurt ours." Over the following weeks, the full scope of Caroline's criminal network became public knowledge. The fake charities had stolen over $80 million in donations meant for legitimate causes. The technology theft had compromised 6 major American companies and potentially endangered national security. Nina Volkov, facing extradition to multiple countries, agreed to cooperate with international law enforcement. Her testimony revealed a sophisticated operation that had been targeting American businesses for over a decade. Carolyn Blake had been the network's most successful American contact, using her social connections and fake charitable work to gain access to high-value targets. The media coverage was intense but different. From the scandal that had destroyed Victoria's marriage, instead of being portrayed as a naive victim, Victoria was now described as the brave heiress who had helped expose international criminals. The humiliation from the charity gala disaster was reframed as the beginning of a justice story. Victoria filed for divorce from Jonathan on grounds of fraud and criminal conspiracy. With his assets frozen and his reputation destroyed, he had no leverage to fight the proceedings. The marriage that had once seemed like a fairy tale ended with a single signature on legal documents. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the boardroom of Sterling Industries addressing the company's senior executives. Her father had asked her to take a more active role in the business, and she had discovered an unexpected talent for strategic planning and crisis management. The security protocols we're implementing will prevent the kind of infiltration our company experienced. Victoria explained to the board members, "Every new hire will undergo enhanced background checks. Every technology partnership will include safeguards against industrial espionage." After the meeting, Victoria walked to her new office overlooking Boston Harbor. The space had been designed to her specifications: clean lines, natural light, and a view that reminded her daily of the Sterling family's long history in American business. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Sterling, there's someone here to see you. He says it's about a business proposal." Victoria looked up from her laptop to see a tall man with kind brown eyes and an easy smile waiting in her doorway. He wore a well-tailored suit, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his success, rather than inherited it. "Miss Sterling, I'm David Morrison. I own Morrison Construction. We've been following your work on the new security protocols. I'd like to discuss a potential partnership." Victoria gestured for him to sit down. Over the next hour, David explained his company's focus on building secure facilities for government contractors. His background check had already been completed by Victoria's new security team. Unlike Jonathan, David Morrison was exactly who he claimed to be: a self-made businessman with an impeccable reputation and no hidden agendas. "I have to ask," David said as their business discussion wound down, "how do you rebuild trust after what you've been through? The media coverage of your situation has been extensive." Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she had felt in months. "I learned that trust isn't something you give blindly. It's something people earn through consistent actions over time. And I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was." "That's a valuable lesson," David replied. "Though I imagine it came at a high cost." "The highest," Victoria agreed. "But sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that change your life for the better." Their business partnership began formally 2 weeks later. Morrison Construction would work exclusively with Sterling Industries on government projects requiring enhanced security measures. But Victoria found herself looking forward to their weekly planning meetings for reasons that had nothing to do with construction. Contracts. David Morrison was everything Jonathan had pretended to be: honest, ambitious, and genuinely interested in Victoria as a person rather than as access to the sterling fortune. He asked about her opinions on business strategy, listened when she talked about her charitable interests, and never once mentioned her family's wealth as a factor in their professional relationship. 3 months into their partnership, David asked Victoria to dinner at a small restaurant far from Boston's social scene. "This isn't about business," he said carefully. "I know you're probably not ready for anything personal, given everything you've been through. But I'd like to get to know you better, if you're interested." Victoria studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. She found none. David Morrison seemed to be exactly what he appeared, a decent man interested in her as an individual, not as a symbol of wealth or social status. "I'd like that," she replied. "But I should warn you I have trust issues these days." David smiled. "I'd be worried if you didn't. Trust should be earned, not assumed." Their first real date was nothing like the elaborate courtship rituals Victoria had experienced with Jonathan. They went to a neighborhood Italian restaurant where David was clearly a regular customer. He ordered wine without consulting the price, tipped the waitress generously, and spent 3 hours talking with Victoria about everything from architecture to her plans for expanding Sterling Industries' charitable foundation. "I have a confession," David said as they walked to his car after dinner. "I knew who you were before I came to your office that day. Everyone in Boston business circles knows the Sterling name." Victoria tensed, wondering if this was the moment David revealed his true motives. And I spent 2 weeks researching everything I could find about you before I asked for that meeting. Not because I wanted to use you for anything, but because I wanted to make sure I was good enough to work with your company." Victoria stared at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Sterling Industries has a reputation for excellence that goes back 5 generations. I wanted to make sure Morrison Construction could meet your standards. I was nervous about impressing you, not about taking advantage of you." The honesty in David's voice was so different from the careful manipulation Victoria had experienced in her marriage that she almost didn't know how to respond. Here was a man who had been worried about being worthy of her time, rather than scheming to exploit her resources. 1 year after the charity gala disaster that had destroyed her marriage, Victoria Sterling stood in the same ballroom where her life had fallen apart. This time, she was hosting the annual Sterling Foundation Gala to benefit victims of financial crimes. The irony was intentional. David Morrison stood beside her as she addressed the crowd of donors and supporters. Caroline Blake and Jonathan were both serving federal prison sentences. Nina Volkov had been extradited to 3 countries and would spend the next 20 years in various international prisons. "Tonight, we celebrate something important," Victoria told the assembled guests. "We celebrate the truth. We celebrate justice. And we celebrate the strength that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing to build something better." The evening was everything the previous year's gala had pretended to be: genuine charity, honest relationships, and people working together for legitimate causes. Victoria had learned to tell the difference between real substance and beautiful facades. As the evening wound down, David found Victoria on the ballroom's balcony overlooking the city. "Successful event," he said, joining her at the railing. "Different from last year," Victoria replied with a smile. "Better." David took her hand gently. "I have something to ask you, and I want you to know there's no pressure at all. If you're not ready, or if you never want this, that's completely fine." Victoria turned to face him, her heart racing. "What is it?" David pulled out a small velvet box. "I love you, Victoria. Not your name, not your money, not your social connections. I love the woman who stood up to criminals and won. I love the person who turned her worst day into a mission to help others. I love the way you've rebuilt yourself into someone even stronger than before." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Victoria looked at the ring, then at David's face. A year ago, she would have said yes immediately, caught up in romantic emotions and social expectations. Now, she took time to think, to examine her feelings and his motives. To make sure this decision was based on reality rather than hope, "Yes," she said finally. "But I want a prenuptial agreement that protects both of us. And I want a long engagement so we can be absolutely certain this is right." David smiled and slipped the ring onto her finger. "I wouldn't expect anything less from the woman who helped take down an international crime ring. You've learned to be careful, and I respect that." Victoria looked out over the city lights, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The betrayal, the humiliation, the investigation, the trials. And now, this new beginning was someone who had proven himself trustworthy. Through actions rather than words, Carolyn Blake had intended to destroy Victoria. Sterling through public humiliation and financial ruin. Instead, she had inadvertently freed Victoria from a fraudulent marriage and revealed her true strength. The naive socialite who had trusted blindly was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had learned to see people clearly, to value substance over appearance, and to build her life on foundations solid enough to withstand any storm. Victoria Sterling had not just survived betrayal. She had transformed it into wisdom, strength, and ultimately genuine happiness. The woman who had laughed at her pain was spending 15 years in federal prison, while Victoria was planning a future built on truth, justice, and real love. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could happen to you. Victoria's story was proof that with courage, intelligence, and good people by your side, even the most devastating betrayal could become the beginning of something wonderful. The Sterling legacy would continue, stronger than ever, built on the unshakable foundation of a woman who had learned the difference between what glittered and what was truly gold.